Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcia Nedland with the National Middle Neighborhoods Initiative Community of Practice. And what we're going to do right now is just let everyone enter the room for this webinar. It would be great as you're entering the room if you could type into the chat where you're tuning in from. That helps us know sort of the geographic scope of our audience. And we'll get started just as soon as we get a good chunk of participants in the room. Let's see, let's see, is the chat enabled? Yes, it is. Okay, I'll start. I'm from Tucson, Arizona today, at least. Thanks everyone for coming in. We're just waiting for the room to fill. Now we have Las Vegas. That's great. St. Louis, Rocky Mount. Clarksdale, that's great. I think, Leonette, you're the first Clarksdale person that we've had in a webinar that I can remember. Welcome. I've always wanted to visit Clarksdale. I'm a blues fan. Oh, and April Atkins is with us again today from the Federal Reserve. Thanks again, April. Or April, did I get that wrong? Is it FDIC? Okay, I think I'll go ahead and get started just as people, yes, sorry, April, it's FDIC. As we're continuing to get attendees, I'll go ahead and get started so that we have more time for conversation. Again, my name is Marcia Nedland. I am one of the organizers for the National Middle Neighborhoods Community Practice. And I'll tell you just a couple of things about what that is. If you're new to the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, we're a fairly young, largely volunteer organization, maybe about 6-7 years. We were mobilized to just draw attention to what's happening with middle neighborhoods across the country. And what's happening is that they're disappearing either through decline because no one's paying attention to them, or gentrification because too many people are paying attention to them. But what we're finding is that the way neighborhoods are organized in cities is starting to reflect that polarization of income that we're seeing in the country. And we're really losing those places where a lot of households bought their first homes and started to grow their home equity and pass them on to the rest of their family and so forth. So we're all about getting people to start paying attention to the long-term trends in those middle neighborhoods and making sure they have a strategy for supporting them in whatever ways make sense for them. So our initiative is a joint venture between the National Community Stabilization Trust and NeighborWorks America. We have a steering committee of about 20 people, a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. And we do things like webinars like this one. We have a monthly webinar series. We have case studies, events, newsletters, research into topics relevant to middle neighborhood practitioners and policymakers. And relevant to the topic today, we've directed a lot of our research resources into looking particularly at Black middle neighborhoods and the ways in which the dynamics there are different than their white counterparts. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you may want to visit our website, middleneighborhoods.org. NCST handles policy analysis and advocacy around issues relevant to middle neighborhoods. So let me introduce our guest moderator today. I'm very excited to have Ebony Walden with us today. I first learned about who she was by reading an essay that she wrote for Next City, which is she'll talk about this more. It's kind of what made me think about, one of the things that made me think about doing this webinar. It really captured my imagination and attention. Ebony's based in Richmond. She has a consulting firm. She's an adjunct professor on DEI issues at, let's see, is it Virginia Commonwealth? University. Yeah, I got it. Okay. And she facilitates all kinds of processes, planning processes, community engagement stuff in a way that makes it more likely that the plans will result in inclusive communities. I have really enjoyed getting to know her, and I think you will too. She's going to lead our discussion today. And let me just give you a look at who our panelists are today as well. By the way, I don't think I mentioned that Ebony is an urban planner by training, which makes her especially fascinating person to me because of the intersection of urban planning and equity issues and how we kind of pull those things together. So our panelists today include amazing people. Dara Eskridge is the executive director of a fairly new organization in St. Louis, Invest STL. Lori Gay, who I've known for decades, is the CEO of Neighborhood Housing Services of Los Angeles County. Alima Samad is a new person for me to meet. She's the co-founder of Loiter East Cleveland in Cleveland, Ohio. And Chris Tyson is also fairly new, president of National Community Stabilization Trust. So happy to have him join us and become part of the Middle Neighborhoods gang. So I'll hand it off to Ebony now and let her take us on this conversation.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm super excited for this conversation. You all are in for a treat with some of the community development heavy hitters and practitioners from around the country. So just excited to be here. A little bit more about me. As Marcia said, my name is Ebony Walden. I have a small Richmond, Virginia-based consulting firm called Ebony Walden Consulting. I like to say that my work is at the intersection of systemic racism and place. And so my background is in urban planning. I also do diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting. About 8 years ago, as a practicing planner for about 8 years, I decided that you could not change communities unless you deeply understood and were able to lead other people in discussion about how systemic racism has so shaped our places. In order to undo that, you have to understand it deeply and then lead people in those discussions to be able to disrupt it. So I like to say I help organizations create more just and inclusive communities, not only thinking about how do they do that with their internal processes in their organizations, but how do they manifest that more equity in their work around placemaking. Particularly, I work with community development practitioners from around the country. So that is my niche. So I'm going to start off this conversation really talking about the catalyst forward, or for this kind of take on the conversation. We're talking about centering Black prosperity and the revitalization of Black middle neighborhoods. And so Marcia was kind enough to reach out to me after she read my essay. I wrote an essay that was republished in Next City. It was actually a response to a prompt that I had that was rooted in something called the Richmond Racial Equity Essay. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm going along doing my work and everybody's starting to talk about equity. And I had the inkling that most people that actually didn't know what that meant, but I was in touch with practitioners in Richmond, Virginia, where I live, who were living it out, and they were struggling with or wrestling with what that meant. And so I asked 50 people what was their vision for racial equity and how do we get there? My essay was a response to that prompt. What's our vision for racial equity and how do we get there? In order to respond to that, I really went back to put on my lenses what got me into urban planning. I tell a story in that essay about seeing racial difference written in every landscape of my life since that I could remember. And that seeing and knowing began when I was about 8 years old. I moved from Queens in New York, in the city of New York, to Long Island. And if you know anything about Long Island, it's 2 counties, but they have these little hamlets, towns, and villages that are right next to one another. And the jurisdiction to the north and south of mine, which is Black and brown community, were white. And when we crossed those lines, driving across to go to the major shopping center, everything changed. Trees were bigger. Lawns were bigger, houses were bigger, nicer, better shopping, better schools, better access to resources, not only aesthetically, but that access to resources. And that, I think, was the engine to say, I want to change that. I saw that replicated, become ubiquitous in almost all urban communities that I've seen around the country, and indeed probably yours, where you cross these dividing lines and you say, oh, this is a Black community, this is a white community, is written into our landscape. And so in the essay, I was like, what if we flip that script? So much so in both our language and culture, and even urban planning, community development, Black communities have become synonymous with lack, with being distressed, and this really deficit mindset. And I said, well, what if we centered Black prosperity and Black excellence in our placemaking? What would that look like? And what will we have to do in order to get there? And I came up with two things as a response to that. What if we rooted our placement making in identity and ownership? Identity meaning, what if we highlighted Black history, Black culture in our placemaking? So not only in our art, but in our storytelling, that I drive down the street in an African-American neighborhood and I'm seeing luminaries, I am seeing prosperous businesses, I am seeing whether it's murals or monuments or placards or placemaking elements that really signify this is a Black space and it's good and wonderful and beautiful. How can we highlight that? Because one of the things that I see, and everybody sees, the threat of gentrification is not only about displacement, but is about cultural erasure. So how do we preempt that and say, we're gonna root our placemaking these Black spaces in culture, in excellence, in beauty? And the second thing is supporting ownership. So the second kind of threat of gentrification is around displacement, not only housing, but also businesses. So how do we flip that script and say, we're gonna root our placemaking efforts in supporting home ownership for Black communities, but also business ownership, not only new businesses, making sure we can attract new businesses, making sure businesses can expand, and making sure the businesses that have been there for 10, 20, 30 years that are in threat can stay. And I think that's also around ownership, not just business ownership, but ownership of commercial spaces. Because when you have that ownership, you're not threat for increases in rent, or somebody's going to buy the building that you've been in 30 years, flip it, and then you're out of a place to operate your business. So those are the 2 points. Like, how do we have Black prosperous neighborhoods rooted in history and culture that's rich in food of African Americans, but also support ownership, business ownership, and home ownership? So that's my thesis, but let's get into, we have 4 other community development practitioners here today. They have a wide breadth and depth of experience and from all over the country. Before we get into the depth of the discussion about all the wonderful things that they're doing, I want to just have them introduce themselves to talk about who you are. So just kind of your name, what do you do in the daytime, and what was a pivotal moment in your life that brought you to the work that you do today? Dara, would you mind kicking us off?
Absolutely. Hello, it's so great to be with everyone. My name is Dara Eskridge. I'm the Executive Director of Invest STL in St. Louis, Missouri. By trade, I also am an urban planner and an architect. I think I'm also discovering that I'm an aspiring economist because I spend a lot of my time really thinking about economic policy and behaviors and patterns and, what are the challenges and what are the solutions that we can create, especially at a neighborhood level for Black neighborhoods to help them prosper and benefit from the places that they've been committed to for so long. But what brings me to this work, I'm the daughter of a serial entrepreneur. My father started off in investment brokerage in New York. And then, that was a dream that was short-lived. And, he had to find space for him to make a living and to support a family. And so he went into insurance brokerage and then opened up his own real estate firm, which he still operates. And I spent a lot of time, in the passenger seat, driving all throughout the St. Louis metro area, seeing so many different types of neighborhoods, how they're organized, who's involved, just, the spirit of each of these places, and starting to notice very stark differences. And so questions started, bubbling up for me, like what's creating the differences? Why are places better off? And then, that was balanced with my mother, who was a career public servant working in safety net organizations. And I think, seeing both of their work up close really aligned me to the work that I do today. You know, it is very much rooted in the communities that I grew up in, while also having a strong focus on policy and service delivering. How do we make these things work for the people who have been committed to these places for so long, when there's been just, you know, immense disinvestment in these places and these people?
Wonderful. Thank you, Dara. Lima, would you mind introducing yourself? So what do you do in the daytime, and then what brought you to this work?
Good morning, everybody. What do I do in the daytime? I work for Loiter. I spend most of my time working on the goals and objectives that we have established for this nonprofit. What brought me to this work really was a lot of things that just kind of converged really during the twin pandemics. And I talked to my brother Ismail on the daily about, you know, everything. I mean, we can take any conversation and draw it back to, well, you know, that happened back when. And so when the twin pandemic happened, we were very I think emotionally connected to, you know, the death of George Floyd and why that happened and why are these things still happening. We were very town. I'm from a very a unique municipality, East Cleveland, Ohio, which now is the poorest city in Ohio. We were born and raised there. But with the pandemic, of course, with the poverty and the lack of resources and the health care and the food situation, all of those things were magnified in this 3 square mile city. And so just conversations happened, and just us really saying, well, this is an opportunity to really put something in motion that is unprecedented, that is unapologetic, that just says all of these things that we're seeing are not by accident. They're predictable. And we've got so many experiences, so many, both myself, my background is in economic development, finance, and small business development. I worked 10 years for the Urban League of Greater Cleveland as a public servant. Before that, I did 5 years in investment banking. So the use of what we need in the community. And with my brother, of course, he's got such vast connections in New England, and he's entrepreneurial, and we're both entrepreneurial, but his knowledge of farming and closed loop farms, food systems, all of that became like, we need all of this now, you know, so it became kind of like this immediate urge and need to bring really sincere solutions to a environment that is in need of everything. So
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think Loiter is such a really interesting organization. Could you give us like 2 sentences on what Loiter is and what you all do?
yes, our mission is to confront the effects of systemic racism. And with that, it comes along with spatial justice, economic justice, narrative control, and the opportunity for wealth creation through the development of small equity-based enterprises. So that's what we look to do.
Thank you, Alima.
You're welcome.
Lori, would you mind introducing yourself and what was something pivotal that got you to where you are today and the work you do?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I am Lori Gay. I'm the CEO of Neighborhood Housing Services of LA County. And I've been around a long time, as Marcia mentioned. Decades we've known each other. And I think it's NHS is set up as a part of the NeighborWorks America network. Our core work is we're known as the region's largest affordable homeownership provider. And so I think we always say it's not that it's a super big deal. We just have been focused for a very long time. And our efforts are to get people into affordable homeownership and keep them there. And that work has taken us into the most divested neighborhoods in LA County, certainly. And then to having a 94% of our business serving ethnic minorities. About 7 years ago, we realized that Black families had not recovered well from the last foreclosure crisis, and our business had cut in half for serving Black families. And that's unacceptable with any people group. So we got on it and created the Legacy Project, which I'll mention later. But the real piece there is just we're now 46% Black families in our service delivery models, ages 25 to 44. So we're picking up that millennial, and we're excited about the work there and how we're able to achieve. The pivotal piece for me really is I'm a person of faith, and my dad was a longtime pastor in an all-white town, pretty much, in Northern California, and I grew up being spit on and called out of my name every day, and got used to it and learned to turn the other cheek until about 9th grade when I decided I'd been called that for the last time. And I realized my father's work as a pastor wasn't changing enough. And I think that pretty much from probably the 9th grade on, I was focused on economic development, community development, housing, if people don't have a place to live, and that wasn't about minorities because I was in a predominantly white town. It was about economics. And that's kind of been the thrust for me. There's just been all kinds of great moments along the way. But I think my faith commitment is that everyone should have a chance to play at the table. And when that's not true, we need to pay attention, talk about it, and do something about it. And so it's a time for Black people right now. And we need to marshal our resources and those of others to get our work done. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lori. And last but not least, Christopher. So tell us a little bit about you and kind of what brought you to the place that you are today.
Thank you, Ebony. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are. It's good to be a part of this discussion. Been thinking about my own story, listening to everyone else's. I was a kid. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I was a kid who was just obsessed with architecture and buildings, and I drew houses, and I loved all of that. And it took me to study architecture at Howard University. And by the time I was through with that program, I had a deep racial consciousness and awareness of inequality that I was very curious about, and pursued through various civic and community pursuits, but I hadn't seen it reflected in my vocational pursuits. So that took me to study public policy, and that took me to study law. And as I grew in my career, I began to put all of these things together, understanding that my initial fascination with the built environment and my concerns around racial justice and the law and the policy undergirding that, the economics of that, was all kind of represented in community development in ways that I hadn't, as a young person or even as a student, really identified. And as a sidebar, one of the things that I like to do is expose young people to a career in this area, right? And there are various ways, as we all know, to approach this work, but I don't think enough of our young people see these types of vocations. They can identify and diagnose what's happening in their communities, and their own indignation with that is very palpable, but I don't think we've done enough to help them channel that into vocations where they can gain and utilize professional skills to bring about the type of change that they want to see. I'm currently president of the National Community Stabilization Trust. I'm just past 1 month in this role, so still figuring out where the bathrooms are, but I come to this most recently as president and CEO of Build Baton Rouge, which is that city's redevelopment authority and land bank. And I spent 4 years there on a leave of absence from my position at the LSU Law Center, where I was a professor teaching urban land use and development and property and local government law for over a decade, and in private practice as a real estate and land use attorney prior to that. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about the built environment. I've spent a lot of time thinking about racial inequality in 3 dimensions, right? And I think that's important to spatialize our understanding of this history. It's one thing, and I'm glad that we've gotten to a point where redlining and the history of the state-sanctioned divestment of Black communities and the racialized ways in which we created the mortgage finance industry and the system of housing that we have writ large. I'm glad that that has reached some critical mass, but I still think there are a number of connections that we need to make clearer for people, that we need to sit with this history a little more and connect it to our personal narratives. Again, this is not something that happened, it's something that's happening, right? The effects of these policies and practices are cumulative, right? And they are ongoing, right? So we are not talking about something in the past, we are talking about something we are living in the midst of. And that's important because it recasts what we see as community. My own upbringing in Black neighborhoods. The neighborhood that I grew up in was a fairly middle class, upper middle class Black enclave, shaped in large part by white flight, but not entirely. It had some white families who remained. But interestingly, and to this day, it was a subdivision on one side of a main road, and on the other side, there was the same exact subdivision. If I drove you through them and you would not know you were in one or the other, but one remained always primarily white, developed in the same period of time, same style of home, same level of upkeep. There is still to this day about a 30% discount on my neighborhood in property values. And that exact neighborhood. And when we sold the family home of 36 years and downsized my mother into her retirement home, that was clear for me what the wealth transfer effects remain, how they remain in these neighborhoods. And again, this was a nice Black neighborhood, right? This was Black folks doing well. And so I'll offer that and pause there. I think we all have lived experience around this if we kind of peel back the onion and really examine the layers of our own stories as to how these things play out. Gaps do not naturally close, right? They widen. It's the law of compound interest, right? These things compound. We should expect that these gaps are going to continue to widen unless there is some very intentional, well-resourced intervention to close them. And I will say, in closing to my introduction, right, that none of this is some urban crisis. That would imply something unexpected, something unplanned, something that we could not have foreseen. This is the logical result of decades of policy, action, economics, politics, that we have to be just as intentional about reversing. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, and so much to the introductions of all of you. I just want to hold a couple of points. I love that you said, and which is why I always ask people what was the experience that brought them to this particular thing, because everybody has a personal story around where they grew up, Black or white or in between, right? Is that racism has so shaped where we live and our perceptions of the world if we dig deep. And that's kind of what I asked everybody in my essay project to do. Is like, start us with your personal experience, because that's going to connect and thread. And I think part of what I want to do in my work is help people concretize or make concrete those connections in their own life, because we have them. We don't have to necessarily read books. You actually just go outside and walk down the street, and you can see all of these things manifest in our physical environment. And I love what you said about, I encourage folks that this was intentional, right? These are laws and policies over the course of really centuries, but in recent history, the past 100 years, that really has shaped the urban environment. So we have to be intentional about disrupting those things and having these conversations about what is it then do we do, giving this cumulative and compounding history and present day reality that we have. So that is a good segue into the next portion of our conversation. When I was talking about in my essay about those points of identity and ownership, I linked to a bunch of different best practices. So I think everybody here would love to hear from you all, and you're doing so many different things about what are you doing now to support and address Black prosperity in your work? And you're probably doing a bunch of different things. So maybe one or two things you or your organization have been invested in recent history to really address that by way as a model or best practice of how we can be disruptive. So whoever wants to go first, and then would love to hear from everyone.
Okay, that'll be me. Well, I think from Loiter's point of view, we had to seed everything in a reality of the people that are there, of our neighbors, of the existing residents. And we didn't want to sell hope. We didn't want to sell education. And we wanted to give them accessible economic opportunities. And that was a difficult conversation between me and my brother, because we understand the impact of people saying, you got to get out, right? You got to leave the ghetto, you got to leave the hood. And that has a psychological component that you don't even see the value in front of your very eyes. And so we speak very candidly when we're speaking to our board or our funders about, we have to address the psychological elephant in the room on both sides, the people that we're asking money for and the people that we're going to be investing equitable solutions in. And so that's a huge component. So when we talk about how we're going to bring economic justice, and that's our piece, is economic justice to the people that are there, and invite people to come and take place in that opportunity. It came with, how are we going to create generational wealth? And so we're targeting the existing homeowner community because they have assets that are devalued, and that's a whole nother conversation, but we have to start somewhere. And so we're bringing opportunity for them through agritourism, agribusiness, and bringing, because we know that the answer is, well, we don't have any money, and a large reality is we're going to look at the personal finance of the people there, and there may be property taxes that are owed, and there's going to be issues that exist that we're going to have to address, or we're not going to get the community buy-in. So for us, that became, oh, well, we need a equity fund, and we're not going to push debt solutions on people that want to change, but then burden them with a debt obligation that's going to flip the script on them. And we know the trends of small business, of startup businesses. We know the trends of what's going to eventually cause a homeowner to either abandon their home or sell it for something. So all that research is done. But so we said we need to present equitable solutions to people. And so that was another component. So bringing industry through agritourism and farming, bringing an equity fund to say, hey, just stay on the course, and we will help you by investing equitable solutions into your land property. You bring your self-determination and let us guide you through this process, because we don't expect them to be the experts. Third is to bring in a what used to be called a IDA program, a community match program, is to give them, hey, you've got to put some skin in the game. This isn't a free ride. There's no free lunch. Roll up your sleeves. Let's get to work. So we are going to bring in the match savings program to match with our equity fund, so that if they save, $500, we'll get a bank match. So then they'll have $1,000 to invest as well. Now, the key with that was very interesting, because anybody that knows anything about the traditional way, right, is you can use this money to go to school. You can use this money to start a business. You can use this money to buy a house. Well, we're saying, well, that's not working. That has not worked. And in one of my other positions, I worked in micro enterprise and saw that and kind of was like, well, hey, this isn't working. We're under financing these deals. That's a whole nother conversation. But the population that we have, they have a home. They're not going to want to buy another one. They need to improve it. We don't want to invite them to start a business, because we don't want them to close in 5 years, having leveraged the home that they have. So we want them to invest in an existing business. That's another change that we are bringing to the IDA Match program. And number 3, we want them to invest their money in a community trust. And that became the key component, which we're working on now. How are we going to make that work? Now, so what the critical theme was, we need a complete solution that will get the community listening, involved, engaged, and wanting to stay and remain intact as a community, rather than leave because they look outside and see such despair. So that was really how we put our heads together to kind of walk through all the pieces and parts, talk the language of our people, understand what they've been experiencing, because we're a traumatized people, race as a whole, but knowing what they've dealt with, still being in the city of East Cleveland, knowing the forces of gentrification that's coming, because and what you said was so true. There was a politician that said just underneath the bridge between University Circle and East Cleveland, it looked like a bomb went off. And we're saying, you know what, it does. A lot of bombs went off to make this community look the way that it looks today. And that's nothing to be ashamed of, because the people that are still there have been left to steward the blight, the disinvestment, the closed businesses, the old hospital that used to be there that left. You know, they've been left with this reality. So that for us had to become front and center. How we're going to invite people to come face to face with wanting to stay and be a part of our turnaround strategy, and having the pride of self to say we're inviting other people in too, because it's going to strip away that racism of, why would I come and visit your neighborhood, right? Well, because we're the same as your neighborhood, we just don't have the resources. So that became how we're presenting this as a cure, for lack of a better word, of how we're going to create our own trust fund babies.
And I love that. I love that you're focused on investing, right? So they're investing in themselves. They're investing. I love that other businesses. So it's not for everybody to buy another house, but we can invest. I like the trust, invest in the community. What you also are doing, because I've been on the lawyer website, is a podcast where you're really also highlighting the story. So there's this. We may, have these particular weaknesses as a community, but we're going to focus on telling the story of our strengths. And I think that's a really important element, right? We have to change the story and the ways in which we're highlighting those things. So I love that you all are doing that. So I put your web link in the chat. Check it out. You all are doing some amazing stuff, as well as bought a farm. And there's so many different elements of the land, the ownership, the business. But I love the focus on invest. And I think that's a great segue to Dara and Invest STL. Tell us something you all are doing to promote Black prosperity.
Sure, and I love everything that Alima was talking about. I think our organizations are operating from the same theory of change, that owning and reclaiming and dictating our narratives is core to really getting Black neighborhoods and communities on the path to prosperity and wealth creation. Because the stories that are told about our places and our people, they're incomplete, and they often put the onus on us as the the initiators of the deficit, when in fact, this is something that has happened to us over generations, and we're just trying to adapt and survive. And so really reframing these narratives to tell a fuller story, not just of the challenges, but also the dreams and the capacity and the, the expertise that exists within our neighborhoods is core. So I just want to like amplify that. That is critical. To that end, so Invest STL, our work is to facilitate investment in the power of people and their neighborhoods, to help create communities of justice and opportunity, specifically in places that continue to endure systemic anti-Black racism. And so we are part funder, but we are also a policy designer and piloter, we are a convener, and we're embarking on the work of that narrative reframing and supporting Black neighborhoods and really lifting up those holistic stories about their places and their people. But I think one of the things that we do is really around language, right? And so, like I said, we're part funder, but we don't talk about the funds that we facilitate as grants. We refer to them as investments. And that's really critical because I think that we as a community development ecosystem, not just here in St. Louis, but across the country, we have created this mindset that Black neighborhoods are places that need to receive charity. Right. And so if we're giving a grant, we're giving it to them, right? And they have to earn it and prove to us that they're worthy of it and that they know how to use the money. When in fact, Black neighborhoods, they're all investable places and that investment is owed. And so I think it's really critical that we change how we talk about the way that we push dollars into neighborhoods. And like for us, it is an investment. But more concretely, one of the things that we are doing is we're working with an amazing and inspiring set of residents in a couple of neighborhoods here in St. Louis who are really driving a neighborhood planning process, right? This is really resident led. Yes, they have professional planning consultants that they work with, but it is this body of residents who are dictating how this work unfolds, what the priorities are, what the assets are within their neighborhoods that they want to prioritize and really drive how they want to benefit and own from the development of those assets. And I think that's really critical, right? It can't just be about the investment in the physical place. We have to invest in the ability for people to recognize their own agency, to drive how their neighborhoods unfold and how they prosper. Alongside that, we have a question around, as we're making these larger investments on a neighborhood-wide scale, what does it look like if we also simultaneously make investments directly at the household level? And so we are at the final stages of designing a pilot that I would love to, be able to share with you all at a later date, but it really is looking at household level investments that has choice as a critical component of the program design, specifically focused on, when neighborhoods are in transition and you're seeing an economic uptick on the horizon, how do you support neighborhoods and the people who have been there and being able to stay there and stave off displacement in all of its forms, not just economic and physical, but also social and cultural.
Right.
And so, I am very excited about this work, like moving dollars directly to households. I've been in part of so many projects where, there are tens of millions of dollars coming from federal level and national philanthropies. And I have often wondered, if we just took that big check and split it up, 1,000 ways to each of the households there, would the impact have been greater, right? Would people have been better off and in a better economic position had we just done that? And so that's what we're really starting to tease at now. And I really want to emphasize, like, choice has to be part of it. If choice isn't part of the equation, then wealth is not a possible outcome. And then finally, I'll share with you, we are in the beginning stages of working on property valuation methods. Christopher talked about, how we all have these stories, and I can certainly trace within my own family very specific moments of extraction and blocking from economic opportunity tied to property, right? And while there are a lot of innovations popping up across the country and even here at St. Louis that try to solve for that appraisal gap, that's just a stopgap. The work that we're embarking on now really is trying to get at the root of how values are assessed from the very beginning, and really trying to undo that compounding of really false values just because a property was located in proximity to Black people. And so I'm very excited to try and work through that and reveal a new method that more aptly places value on property not tied to race.
Yeah, I love that. And the focus on how do we invest in different ways, right? I think that's what you and Alima have sort of in this synergy around and innovation, right? You're testing, you're trying, you're piloting, you're saying, this isn't working. Let's try a new idea. Let's try something else. Let's do something that's disruptive. And I think it's that mindset, this innovation mindset and pushing the boundaries of barriers. Even you're thinking about funding and philanthropy in a different way, not just investing in organizations, but whole neighborhoods and people. So this holistic approach, I think, is dynamic and noteworthy, and can't wait to hear about the pilot you were talking about when you're able to release those details. So I'm going to move on to Lori. What are you all there in Los Angeles and your organization doing to address Black prosperity? I hope you'll talk about the Legacy Project, but you can talk about whatever you want. I'm sure you're doing multiple things.
We are, and I'm grateful to you for just pushing the conversation, right? So I tend to start things by saying I need $1 billion. I need $1 billion to get started, but I'll take whatever you got for me. And the reason for that is we live in a high cost, high valued, in most neighborhoods, region. And California is ridiculously unaffordable statewide.
Yeah.
So it's not gotten better. But I also don't get to tell people how they live or conduct their business. My job is the choice element that Dara was just talking about. People need to make their own choices. What we try to do is make sure they know there's a longer list than the one they were probably told about over time. And so as we look at the pandemic, there are 13 CDFIs that connected here in South Los Angeles. We were all working together. And that consortium, is made up of a couple of credit unions, a few intermediaries, and then a bunch of us who are running funding in neighborhoods for decades. And we're the only primarily housing group out of the 13. And the other 12 are small business, because they were responding to the pandemic as a priority. And one of the first things we discovered was the little box I create when I talk about the $1 billion. It's people and property, marketing, and money. Those are my 4 bookends. And I want to be always affiliated with organizations that are high profit, high mission. You got to keep the mission in there, but we have to make money to churn money to invest money, right? And that cycle somehow, particularly in the nonprofit sector, people think everything is free. Nothing's free. First rule of economics. First lesson, there's always a price. Now, there may be no charge, but there's a price. And I think that saying that to people has mattered over our 38 years. And what we did is marshal the resources over this last, like I said, 5 to 7 years to focus on why there were not as many Black people participating when we'd always had a 40 to 50% number over our years of service. And I think Legacy was born out of that, Ebony and others. But it really was about taking what we already did well and making sure we didn't miss a people group that we knew had been underserved. And that it's not okay to underserve anybody. It's how do we make sure everyone's having full access, affordability. My 3 A's, I call them: access, affordability, and availability. And so as we look at neighborhoods,
I can tell you're a Black people.
What'd you say?
I said I can see your Black teacher background coming out, or your faith background coming out. Go ahead, your 3A. Sorry to interrupt.
No clue. Yeah, it's okay. I'm in my car. So LA. And so I think that we really have pressed to stand against redlining, pressed to green line as much as we can. Housing's kind of an easy conversation to do some of that, but we always switched into small business and economic development because you're dealing with people and their lives. And so I think the conversation that the other two ladies were pointing out, particularly around Black prosperity, I'm interested in building generational wealth and keeping it. East Coast and in the South, you guys do a better job. You just always have. In California, it's either the sunshine, too much Hollywood. Something's wrong with California and West Coast. We do not think right about passing on legacy within Black families. It's not the first thought. So if Madeira needs to move down to a smaller sized house or go into assisted living, the first thing that was happening with puppies out here, Black urban professionals, is they'd say, well, I'm living in Santa Monica. I don't need all that Black culture. I'm good. And I'm saying, you're not good. You make enough money to take over owning Madeira's house. She probably has paid it off. So why would you just flip it for sale and make a chunk of money and then line your pockets and do bling? That's not smart. And I'm in your face to tell you it's not smart. And so as we did that over this last 7 or 8 years post foreclosure era, it shifted. And you have a number of initiatives and groups that have started to encourage young Black people to consider owning business, owning housing. But I just say the intentionality is the core to all that modeling. And we have, for more than 30 years, I've been at NHS, been saying to investors, you're not intentional. You want to do slapstick, patty cake marketing programs. And because Black people can respond to beauty contest stuff, you keep feeding us that diet. I'm here to disrupt the conversation and say that diet doesn't work for me anymore. So let's jump in with the USDA and do agribusiness again, because that's how many of us got here. And so we're urban agriculturalists, right? When we build housing, we have community gardens, we have farming we're trying to add now to our subdivisions. It's how do we change the narrative with what we do, but also spend our time really saying to people, you can achieve. And so the financial literacy piece, financial education is where our work begins. Then we lend affordably, and then we really push for people to own their real estate, own their business, right? And then last but not least is revitalizing the communities we're in. Half of the communities we serve in our region, it's the thoroughfares, the commercial strip that looks like trash, and then the housing is decent to phenomenal that's attached to it. So we think as a neighborhood developer, I want to encourage people to not lose that, but we need bigger investments to grow Black prosperity and wealth. While we're doing the people quotient, we need the organizations that are like the ones on the phone and others to be resourced well so that they can come alongside the families and help them figure out which investments they want to make to achieve success. And so folks can read about legacy online. I think we don't do as great a job talking about it because we're so busy working, Ebony, but we did do a legacy summit in early March, I think it was. And we brought in this last piece I want to throw on the table, the Black estate planners. Now, I co-chair a group called the Black Community Developers Group. And all you all need to join because we're going national. We're just getting our little poop together. We were, mostly a coalition around supporting each other for the last 5 or 10 years. And now it's incorporated, we're moving forward. And part of that work is to get other Black organizations, national and local, to join together to resource Black families. And what I'd say to you is the Black Estate Planners Network that Amy has put together is unparalleled. And we have to think all the way through. If we don't provide people the opportunity to do that, then we limit the choices they'll make in the moment. And I think if there's nothing else I say, that's really what I want to encourage you about.
Oh, all wonderful stuff. And I threads coming through. Chris, last but not least, what have you been doing to support Black prosperity in your work? I know you just are a month into your job, but you have a long trajectory in community development in doing this work. What might you have to add as a best practice to this conversation?
Well, coming on the tail end of Lori's comments, I have to shout out anyone taking a serious approach to heirs properties. issues in Black communities. It is, I'm in a state in Louisiana where we have a serious issue with that. And so glad to hear that you're getting estate planners together, because that's something that we just don't focus on enough. So I get to inherit NCST's long track record of intervening in mortgage markets and distressed property with a focus on stabilizing communities and promoting affordable home ownership, and doing so in ways that close the Black home ownership gap and the Black wealth gap writ large. We continue that work. Our work with REO foreclosures and our community-based nonprofits around the country, where we've transferred over 27,000 homes to community-based nonprofits that are preparing those foreclosed homes, which are usually producing blight in communities and destabilizing neighborhoods. These are the homes on the otherwise stable blocks that, if you don't, address, they will begin to drag down the quality of the neighborhood and all of the other things that come from blighted property. Getting those in the hands of community-based nonprofits that are connected to the community, that are building capacity and helping people get home ownership opportunities, we think is important. It's been our bread and butter, and we continue to focus on that. But we pan out into a number of other programs. NCST has always been focused on policy. As I said, policy is at the front of this, and so it always has to be, in our view, as a solution. So we are working with many other partners on CRA reform, how banks and financial institutions pour into these communities, and making sure that we have regulatory approaches that are addressing these racial gaps explicitly and directly, that we are promoting the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. One of the features that should have been in Build Back Better, but hopefully will be in some tax package before the end of the year, that has the opportunity to address the value gap in neighborhoods where it's often more expensive. It costs more to rehab property than that property will appraise for, and that then prevents community developers, who are the ones who are going to do this work. And so we have an opportunity to build expertise and wealth in Black communities, where people in those neighborhoods who know best, who care the most, can actually work as developers in bringing those properties back to life. But we have to address the value gap, because right now they simply cannot put money into homes that are not going to appraise, and that ties to the appraisal issue as well. So we're really happy to champion the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act with a number of our partners. We're on the ground in Baltimore with a pilot program called the Developing Affordable Starter Homes Program, the DASH program, where we are providing really advantageous financing to, again, community developers to address the blighted properties and bringing them back into the home ownership pool. And so we're really excited about our work in Baltimore. And of course, I'm funneling here to what brings me on this call is our leadership of the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative and our focus on Black middle neighborhoods. This is vital. We know that as everyone on this call has kind of spoken to directly or indirectly, our Black neighborhoods are places where working and middle class Black families have owned property for decades, but they have always been targeted by lending practices that have been discriminatory. Obviously, we know what happens with appraisals. We know what happens with redlining. And so against all of that, these neighborhoods have survived and they've thrived in many ways, but they are vulnerable. And so they need particular approaches and support that understand this history, understand the specific vulnerabilities that they uniquely face, and can tailor solutions to that. So we're excited to lead this conversation on Black middle neighborhoods with the many partners engaged in this work, and see that as a core part of what we're going to be doing going forward.
Thank you, Chris. And in the interest of time, I want to get to Q&A, but I would love for you all to finish this. You got like 2 sentences. So to promote Black prosperity and community development, what should we do? How would you finish that sentence? if this is your encouragement to the whole field of community development, what do we need to do different? Chris, why don't you start because you're unmuted? What is one thing you think we need to do?
I have 2 sentences.
Okay,
I'm not gonna am I limited to that? I'm not gonna.
yes, 2 sentences,
I
complete
can work a
sentence.
sentence with some commas and some. So no, I would say this is something that I haven't talked about, but I always want to put a plug in for this. We have to get away from this notion that Black folks are supposed to volunteer their way through all of this. We have to create opportunities for people to be employed, to gain skills, to build capacity, and to understand this as a profession, because it's not enough for those of us who get paid well to swoop in and do this work and leave people expecting them on the strength of volunteerism to do this reparative work that they did not have a hand, in creating the mess. And so that's what I want to focus on, is making sure that we are always employing people in the neighborhood and creating pathways to greater capacity and professionalism.
All right, I think that was 4 sentences, but
I know.
You're fine. What about you, Tara? You're good, Chris. Thank you. I love that.
One, I think, as organizations, we need to rethink how we organize ourselves. So Invest STL, we're actually on a mission to close our doors in 20 years. And that's because we've got a very specific focus on trying to actually implement things that truly do support wealth building and solving systemic problems versus delaying the growth of gas. And that's a very big mindset shift. If we're focused on putting ourselves out of business, we then focus all of our resources and our energy in supporting communities in being able to do what they need to do, have what they need to have, and own that. And secondly, I think, Christopher said it earlier, we need to focus more on policy change, not just service delivery.
Wonderful. Thank you. Alima, what are your thoughts? Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry. I would say using equity solutions to build community wealth. I think everything that we work on with Loiter involves that. It's a community wealth building solution that we're trying to tailor because the circumstances in East Cleveland as its own municipality, if you go around the country, there you can model it out. And so what we're trying to do is pilot this Loiter as a solution, right? And if we can come with equity-based solutions to create community wealth, then you're going to create loyalty with where one lives and not an acceptance to see a future where they want to be and they don't want to leave. So that's what we're up against. And it involves a lot of pieces and to kind of align, but I think we're getting there. One of the ways that we did, you mentioned, I forgot to even mention that an opportunity came for us to buy a small business that we now can nurture and build upon that to bring a farming industry to homeowners that would never see themselves as homeowner farmers. But we're trying to bring accessible wealth building solutions to the community to invite them to stay.
Wonderful. The focus on everything you should do, you should be equity centered and moving towards wealth building. Yeah. Love it. Lori, last but not least, what are your 2 cents on this?
A bunch of dittos to everything that's already been said. And it all has to be in ownership, whatever that format is. But I would say don't sell ourselves cheap. We need to communicate much more clear messages about our achievements. So a part of our legacy project, and you guys, again, nothing can be stole, right? We need to share, is working with Black public radio owners, Black media, and helping them tell the story of success. Yeah. So there's Black LA, there's Black Detroit, there's Black Baton Rouge, there's Black Dallas. how do we get that messaging out there in each of our neighborhoods? We're learning in Los Angeles how many neighborhoods were built by Black people. Y'all know it as Venice, California, but that neighborhood was built and owned by Black people in the 20s. We just did all the work in the background with Kavan on Bruce's Beach, right? We got multiple communities in a city as big as ours and a region as big as ours where Black people were first. We were doing it. Black Wall Street, do we need to go back in history, right? So communicating key messages and the data surrounding our achievement. On the website, Saving Black Homeownership is a partnership we did with UCLA. All of us should be doing that with our local education institutions to show where we are, what's needed, affect policy, et cetera. And then I guess the last thing I'd say is just beyond communication and everything everyone else has said, is this notion of reparations. I want to be a little bit of a disruptor, Ebony, right at the end here. PPP was reparations, okay? One of the first podcasts I did was with my boy Andre, and we were talking about reparations. And whatever you want to call it, the investments need to happen. And I don't want them to be me paying you back at double and triple digits. I'm not interested in that. Low cost, patient capital to do the work. And I started my talk earlier with, I need $1 billion. I mean that. Just to get started, right? Because you need real money to make real things happen. And we shouldn't feel like we're asking for something. This is economic investment for economic outcome. And so I think that that's for, if we don't have money, I mean, show me the money, pick a language, show me the money. And it's got to be done now so that we can all come up together.
I love that. Investment, the money, the storytelling, I think is really important piece that we often forget. Telling that story, narrative change, and how we think about ourselves, how we think about Black communities, and unearthing the rich histories there, I think is equally as important. So thank you all. Would love to jump into the Q&A. First question we have here, I think is for you, Chris. Curious about how your ability to capture the 25 to 44-year-old demographic for home ownership. What has allowed that to happen?
You're saying I guess I don't understand, it's our ability to capture them, or is it talking specifically about something that's happening in
actually, I think this might be for Lori.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's for Lori.
It's Lori, sorry.
Yeah, yes. We were intentional, which is the other first word. We have so many first words we seem to start with around here. And we went after them. So Black engineers, Black architects, minority architects. We just started showing up and talking in varying groups with outreach and then conversations and saying, you need to get in here. You need to change your thinking. You're not invest in building a portfolio, not just your pocketbook, right? And if you're going to do real estate, that's one of the sure tried and true out here in California. We don't ever have a scenario, Chris, where the rehab exceeds the house value. That's it's like 1 per 100,000, maybe. I don't even know, but it just doesn't come up. We've touched 27,000 units of production as of last year. And I'll tell you what, people own and they keep owning when they go through this system, borrowing, where they realize the importance of ownership. Business or house doesn't matter. But pushing that narrative is what I'm saying with the 25 to 44-year-old, and then kind of getting in their face on some stuff, showing up and saying, you want to talk to me about gentrification? Don't sell your mother's house. You want to talk to me about displacement? Don't sell your father's business. I don't want to hear about you not wanting to run a cleaners. You need to watch the Christmas Story that all of us look at the holidays with the Black people. You don't have to sell the business to achieve. You can own it and have somebody else run it. So it's that kind of conversation followed by money, and then followed by technical assistance and support that really shifted the number for us. And it's been exciting, challenging, but exciting to watch.
Wonderful. I love that. New models, right? And I love the piece, and this, you talked about it before, I think Chris talked about it. the estate planning, that's like something we don't do. And thinking about that in my own family, I'm like, it's not a thing. How can we make that a thing so that presumption is not only wealth building, but wealth transfer in our communities? And I think we don't often think about that. Either we don't think about that, or we're thinking about it when it's too late or when the rubber meets the road. So I think those
Well, you know, and Ebony, I'll just say real fast, the number one statistic we find with legacy work is that families don't have the wherewithal to keep the property or business in their portfolio. And so somebody dies or someone needs to make a change or there's a reverse mortgage or whatever. And then the family can't take it over and just manage to it. They struggle. So then they want to sell it. You know, that's as big as the mindset to let me make all the money. And so we want to change that narrative in Black spaces.
Absolutely. Our next question for you all is about how do you manage self-care doing work that is so personal to you?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think we all, because we're so committed and have such connection to what we're doing, just talking about it is therapy in and of itself, because we have to acknowledge the emotional repair that we need, that we all, that's kind of just been passed down. Um, and just from, I guess, personally, um, there's a lot of visualization techniques that I utilize. I'm just completely obsessed with the James Webb Telescope. So I just love looking at those images, and I think about that recently because now we're getting the images, and it forces me to think about time in a different way. And when I think about what we are committed to, I think I'm just this small little piece in what all of our people have been trying to bring to fruition. And it grounds me because I know that where my parents, how they raised us, or what their parents did, the I can't remember the lady in LA in her car being, my mother tells that story all the time. She was one of the first Black families. She got called the N-word, she got spit on, she got treated like a piece of crap. And then for that, how she decided that she didn't want her children to grow up in that. So we stayed planted in East Cleveland. That changed from half and half kind of during the white flight era to now it's all Black and suffering and poor, and we're still there. So there's a lot of things that helps me because I know that there is a different future in store for our people, and not just Black and brown people, but there is so much that we as people can draw on. We know the speeches, we know the songs, we know the movies, we know we know where we came from. And so I just think that the manifestation of greatness is destiny. And so I'm not, I don't feel kind of overwhelmed by that, but I feel humbled to be able to assist with where we are going to be as a human race.
Absolutely. Chris, go ahead. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'll add to that. 'Cause I think it's a great question and maybe an opportunity to share something from my experience. It is great to come into forums like this and talk about racial equity and these histories and all of this knowledge and the policy and this, that, and the other, and we can high five each other. And but to be honest, it can get to be a bit of a bubble. If you are doing this community development work in service of these values, we are not yet at a broad level of acceptance with this, right? I have been in rooms where I have talked about racial equity to philanthropy and government and politicians and people involved in land use and planning, and it chills the room.
Yes.
It can be very alienating work. You're working at the intersection of a number of disciplines that don't necessarily reconcile in everyone's minds, right? It's not clear to everyone instinctively how racial justice work, real estate development, law and policy reform, public finance, how all of those things, and urban planning and placemaking, all of those things need to happen at the same time. You need to be equally focused on them all the time in order to do this work well. That doesn't necessarily translate well to politicians. It doesn't necessarily translate well to business leaders. It doesn't necessarily translate well. So there's a lot of work you have to do. And look, not everyone in our communities, okay, is fully understanding of the need to coalesce around these things. So there's a lot of work. I'm glad you asked the question, because I love the high-fiving around this stuff. That's great. That's not reality everywhere. For people doing this work, it is still very hard. It's still very challenging. No more challenging than any of the work that people who came before us have been through. So you can do it. It's worth doing, right? And you will persevere. But it's good to be clear-eyed about that, and self-care is important.
And I think, go ahead, Dara, and then I'll talk after you do.
No, I agree with all of that. And, I think it's challenging because just listening to everyone, like, it's clear this isn't a job for us, right? We don't actually leave this work when we leave the office, because it is so personal. It is vocation in its truest sense. And so for me, in addition to talking to other practitioners and, community members about the work, because that is both, it can be both blood spiking as well as nurturing for me to do that. Another way that I've really just found, peace is, I live in the very kind of neighborhood that, I work day in and day out with and for. And I love to sit on my porch and see, my neighbors come by and say, "Good morning, Queen," or walk into my garden and we have a cup of tea together, or just like being able to soak in the richness and the diversity of Blackness as a culture, for me, gives me a lot of peace and restores my spirit and allows me to keep coming back to the work.
Thanks. And I'll echo that, because I live in one of those same neighborhoods and have a porch. But I think that we need to manage our time and energy. So some people have 10 spoons of energy. I happen to have 3. So I say no a lot so that I can say yes to the things that are truly important. And a colleague of mine says, not that I don't do things for free, but free labor is what got us into this. And so I manage the amount of things that I do necessarily for free, because there's ad nauseum things or people that want you to do things. So I think you have to be clear on your purpose and what your road or lane of practice is, so you can say yes to those things, and the things that are outside of that, so that there's a clear no. And it's not, a mean no. It's just that I've gotten clarity about what it is that I do and what do I want to engage my time in. And one of my friends who is on this call talks about engaging in Black joy. So having fun, dancing, hanging out with my family. I love to eat. I love to travel. Those are important parts of my life that I'm always giving myself over to, because as Chris says, this work can be heavy. And when you're in those other spaces, you can come home and be dragged down. And so I think it's important for all of us to say, what brings me energy? What brings me joy? And what kind of support systems do I need? I think as a person that's like an overachieving Black person, we can get caught up in the lie that we have to be everything to everybody and we don't take care of ourselves. But asking yourself, what do I need? What kind of support do I need? How do I take a break? I take breaks every day. There's not a day that I don't take a lunch break. So since this is noon, I'll be taking my lunch break soon. I walk around my neighborhood, and I got a 20-minute walk, a 45-minute walk, a half-hour walk. I do one of those every day because it's important to me to integrate that into my life. So I'm not just taking a long vacation when I'm ready to drop everything. And I think that I want to incorporate soon, and will be this year having sabbaticals. So I've had my business for 5 years. I'm ready to take a deep breath. I'm taking 2 months off in the fall so I can take that deep breath and come back and do the work with renewed vigor. So I'm an entrepreneur, so everybody doesn't have that. But between jobs, or if you can put all of your time together to really take an extended break from the work so you can come back with new ideas and energy, I think that is really important. Any other thoughts before we close? Let me look at the questions. Self-care.
I'll just say my self-care is more prayer and everything else everyone else said. I have to pray throughout the day or I don't make it. That's my solution to a whole lot of stuff.
Well, amen to that. I think we stand on the shoulders of a lot of prayers in our community. And indeed, we are the embodiment of somebody's prayer, that we're even here and doing this work and continuing to do this work. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself or raise your hand. We have another couple minutes. Or panelists, do you have any questions for one another as we close? One last.
I want to definitely. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Lori. Go ahead.
I was just gonna make sure. I think it's Alma. I can't see on the screen right now, but that we share some of the Black agriculture work. I think that there's so many communities. If we're doing stuff in LA and we're not agriculture,
Right.
it's how are they doing it? What successes are they having? And make sure some of us see that, because across the country, I know there's a lot of conversation. And so we need the success to see what's working and what's not.
So sharing those best practices. We have some agricultural stuff going on in Virginia too as well. Alima, anything that you can share, website or thoughts around that? And I think Michael Hardy has a question after you respond to that.
Right.
Yes, hi. Oh, I'm sorry.
The way that we've kind of organized this on our website is through setting up different opportunities for people to jump in on. So we kind of are piloting what we think would be low barriers to entry. So we started off with farms and apiaries as one. We started off with the podcast, Loiter Voice and Culture, because we've got so much talent, underutilized talent in the community. So we wanted to invite all the talented people who are artisans and bakers and entertainers or models or designers into an opportunity that they can invest and be managed through technical assistance. We also did the Loiter Sanctuary Home, so that if you have a home and you want us to help you stage it, and then we'll host it on our site. So for us, we put it on the website, and it doesn't translate well, which we're working on, because people don't know that, they have to kind of interact with us to understand. So we're working on that. But that was how we were able to kind of organize the opportunity for people, is to create the industry for people to engage. And so with the farming, we know we needed to have people look out their backyard. And this is just a quick point. The situation amongst our people is such that they have a neighborhood, land bank project, where you can buy, if you have a vacant land next to your home, for $100 or $200. Well, people aren't buying it, right? Because they don't see value in it, because they are, we got our own issues. You don't see value in what's out your back, right in your backyard. So we said, well, if you buy it, which our equity fund comes into play, you can raise the value of your land and property right out your back door. So we wanted to bring opportunity right to people's feet. Now that is going to be where we engage with the community to help them understand the power of investing in themselves. So that's how we organized it. I don't know if I answered your question, but we can talk more offline if you'd like. But we needed to be able to say, this is how you do it versus go out and do it.
Yeah, I think just continuing to share those best practices,
Yeah.
the larger community development community, and that as a model, I think would be important. So we got 1 minute for the last question, Michael, Hardy, and maybe we have one or two of the panelists can answer. Go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, yes, my apologies. I was doing so many things during this meeting. But yes, I have just a comment or a question. If people are in the area of some of the places like where Miss Alima Samad is, I'm across town from you. I consume the foods, Wake Robin foods, and
Oh,
one of your-
nice.
yeah, yes, and I know one of your board members, Zach Reinberger, friends with him, and just wondering, like, if we can, or people on this call, if we live near the areas or whatever, if we could maybe, I don't know, collaborate or maybe somehow have some sort of communication with each other to maybe share some ideas somehow. So how we can do maybe things in our communities, maybe mirror some things through collaboration of,
No,
of ideas or something. Just
Laura, you were going to say something?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's core. And I said earlier, we share, right? So I throw out ideas of what we're doing with Black Public Radio to all of you, because you got your local plans, right? And we can do better in the Black community with that element. I think we've been so beat down and struggling, making bricks out of no straw, that we sometimes miss the intentionality of collaboration. One of our other key things I'll share is we developed the NHS Center for Sustainable Communities in Compton. And that's major Black, brown, get it done with collaboration with other strong partners. So I appreciate Michael's question, because the intentionality around collaborating and knowing it's difficult anyway, do it anyway, matters, particularly if you're nearby each other.
Yes, and if any other panelists wouldn't mind being contacted, I put my, please feel free to put your email in the chat box. If you open up the chat and click on, it might say host and panelists to everyone. We'll have them, whoever's comfortable, put their emails in the chat so you can foster collaboration that way. I want to thank all of our panelists. I think this has been a dynamic conversation. You all have so much knowledge and skill and know-how, and I thank you for sharing that with me, but with our whole audience here today. And I think hopefully we can continue the conversation and folks will reach out to you for collaboration so we can all be supporting and manifesting Black prosperity, both in people, but also in our places as well. And I'll turn it over to Marcia to take us out of here.
Thank you so much, Ebony. You're an amazing facilitator, an amazing thinker, and I really appreciate you. I want to toss in an invitation to everybody who's listening to this, and for you to share it with others that are leaders in your circles. We all need to focus on our circle of influence and advance these issues, make it seem normal that Black prosperity is the overarching goal in community development work. We need to be part of creating the rooms that don't go cold when the subject is brought up. And we need to, it's just like a constant forever battle, but more people need to take it on to educate people about what were the policies and practices in the past that were the logical, that made the situation now a logical outcome, because our work needs to start addressing policy as well. I applaud each and every one of you. I challenge all of us to take this on and carry forward. And if you have any ideas about follow-up conversations on this topic, anyone who participated, I'd love to hear them, and we have an opportunity for you to do that as we close out. So thanks, Chris, thanks, Alima, thanks, Lori. Thanks, Ebony, and thanks, Dara. And I know for sure we're going to have a webinar just with Dara pretty soon when she's able to talk about all the details of what she's about to launch in St. Louis. It's very exciting. Do please join us in our Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. All you have to do is go to middleneighborhoods.org, and at the bottom of any web page you can sign up, and that way you'll always know about additional webinars coming up. We also have a session, if any of you are going to the Reclaiming Vacant Properties conference in Chicago. I think actually, Christopher, that you have a session for NCST that you're doing, but also the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice is offering a session called Addressing Vacant Properties in the Unique Market Conditions of Black Middle Neighborhoods. And we have a really amazing team of people who will be presenting on that topic, and Lori's one of them. So if you're in Chicago, then we encourage you to do that. On August 23rd, we're addressing safety strategies, equitable place-centered strategies for safer communities, and LISC's Department of Safety and Justice will be managing that webinar for us. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think that's all for today. Go out there and keep doing the work. Thank you so much to everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.